Hi, everyone. You've got Tiffany Yu here. And I guess for this episode, I am the host of Diversibility Amplified. Sometimes we have other team members or other community members interview people. And a part of why we started Diversibility Amplified was to be a space to kind of share the disability pride stories of our community members. And so we're actually going to be spending this time talking about grief and maybe how it coincides with pride. I have Jayne Mattingly here and her book, This Body is Grief: Making Peace with the Loss That Comes with Living in a Body, is out March 18th. And this episode may be before then or after then. We'll see. And she has her book displayed, and I don't even know how this is going to get recorded. So I was pointing because we'll publish the video too. Both of us are newly published authors. And I actually think we met because you saw that my book was coming out. Is that how we originally connected?
Yes, I'm really good friends with Cassidy. She and I are besties, Cassidy Huff. And she at one point was like, "Oh my gosh, you have to follow Tiffany." And then I was like so excited about your book coming out. And then yeah, I think from there on out.
Yeah. And
Um,
and I think it had to be about a year ago because I think I
yes.
had just shared my pre-order link and then I got
Yep.
a message from you and
Yeah.
you had submitted the draft or were in edits.
Yes. I think because gosh, it's been 3 years now since I 3 years almost to the day since I got the deal. So for the book. And then yeah, so I think I've been following you for over a year now.
Okay. I do want to get into that. So why don't we start? I always love starting with origin stories, however much you feel comfortable sharing.
Please.
And part of why we start with origin stories is they provide context. They also provide the lens through which you are coming into this conversation. Some people are born with their disabilities, some people acquire them, and we don't owe anyone our stories, but it's a podcast, so
Yes, of course.
and you wrote a book, so yeah, would love to learn more about your origin story, whatever that means to you.
Yes, thank you. Um, so yeah, my origin story is I do identify as newly disabled, which because I am. Granted, I was born with a genetic disorder which causes my disability, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with. Some might not be. It is the genetic illness that is called rare, but it really isn't. I once I was diagnosed with it when I was 27 years old, everything started to make sense. But to kind of narrow everything down, I identified, as non-disabled, quote unquote, healthy. I had an eating disorder when I was nine. It started when I was 9 years old, and it went undiagnosed until I was in my 20s. And I went and got my master's in clinical mental health counseling because I really felt passionately about mental health and representing and advocating those that were like myself and like many other, I was not marginalized, but other marginalized people that did not have access and resources to mental health care and were going undiagnosed and dismissed for their body size because eating disorders are not visible to the eye. I think right now the statistics are like 95% of people are it's not visible to the eye. And it's very, very misunderstood. So I started my business, Recovery Love and Care, which is pretty much no longer, but I was working with people with eating disorders and body image concerns. And ironically, I would do events and I would say, like, work out for what your body can do, not what it looks like. And little did I know how ableist that was. And then I was in a bar class when I was 27 years old, about 6.5 years ago, and I lost my sight completely. And the um, bottom half of my body just like stopped working, went paralyzed. And I went to the ER and they said I was fine, which I obviously wasn't. I was dismissed many times. And it turned out I had a rare neurological disorder called intracranial hypertension. I underwent two brain surgeries, and from there on out, my Ehlers-Danlos was pushed out. And I've had 19 brain and spine surgeries and a total hysterectomy in the past 6 years' time. I'm now in a wheelchair. I have my service dog, and my life has completely changed. I've really had to face my internalized ableism. I mean, look at that. Like, once my body stopped doing, I was like, what, how am I supposed to love my body now? And as I worked with clients through eating disorder recovery, and I started to realize, this is grief. This is, we're all experiencing body grief. And I came up with this term body grief, and I started to talk to people from all walks of life through different ages, through all different experiences, whether that be through menopause, through aging, through gender dysphoria. And it was an experience of grieving their body. And that's where I came about with the book, This is Body Grief. And yeah, and it's been quite the experience. And I think a lot of people are like, well, what do you mean? It's, you're trying to fix it. And this book is not a fix it. It's really just learning how to tap into ways to mitigate the maladaptive ways in which we grieve. And it's really turned into a book about systems of oppression and yeah, a book about joy and gratitude. But it interviews people from all walks of life. And yeah, it's my baby.
Thank you. And actually, I think when I introed you, I didn't say the title of the book correctly.
That's okay. Yes,
This
this
is
is
Body Grief.
yes.
Although I would be excited about a book called This Body is Grief, but the book is
Yes.
called This is Body Grief, and Jayne coined this term body grief. And one of the things, this is probably, I want to say this may be the fourth conversation that we are actually having around grief with regard to a disability experience. And so I talk a lot about disability grief. And so I was wondering if you could share if that phrase resonates with you and what and dig into a little bit more about like what body grief is. Can only disabled people experience it? Is it different? Is it similar to how some of us understand disability grief?
Yeah, so basically, body grief is truly universal. It's something that everyone experiences if you have a body. And it's not something that I think you talk about this in your book, the Anti-Ableist Manifesto, where, with like lateral ableism and things like that, where it's so easy to kind of compare hierarchy of suffering and things of that nature. But there's not. I think when I kind of mention sometimes my story, people are like, well, mine's not that bad. I didn't have 19 brain surgeries. And it's like, no, 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 no. Let's not do that. Because when it comes down to grief and needs, our bodies, we were sometimes promised this life, and we were given this idea of what our bodies were meant to do. And we're grieving this life of what we were promised, or we were grieving this life of our past life. And that is loss, that is change, that is grief. And these 7 phases of grief in this book are things that I've studied professionally and personally, of natural phases that we go through, not phases that we will go through if you follow the book. And so I'm really like kind of averse to like self-help at times, because it can feel like almost a little capitalist, like almost like, here, like let's help, let me help you, let me fix you. This is instead like, these are the phases that you're gonna naturally go through if you're experiencing grief in your body, whether it be disability grief, whether it be aging or whatnot. So it's like you're gonna be in dismissal, and here's how it's gonna look. What if you used these skills and tools, and you burnt out of your maladaptive tools a little bit easier, and then you went into the next phase a little quicker? Um, and then body trust is the last phase. And then we might just dip our toe into body trust every once in a while, and then we're just going to go right back to another phase another time. And so it's not linear, it's multi-cyclical, and there's no fix-it solution, but I think it's compounded. And the more we go through body grievances, the more resilient we become, which kind of sucks, right? But it's also like it is what it is and it's life. And some of us experience more, some of us experience less. But when it comes to disability grief, that is body grief. And I talk about in the book with systems of oppression. I think a lot of disability grief and a lot of body grief has to do with that because if the world were more accessible, I don't know how much body grief would be present. Um, the same we talk about racial inequity, we talk about gender dysphoria, we talk about queer grief, we talk about all of these things. How much of that loss of body autonomy would be present if it wasn't for systems of oppression?
Yeah. Um, I'm like, which part of that do I dig into? I want to talk about what do you call them? Do you call them stages or phases of
Color
grief?
phases.
Phase-
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
they and this is me looking at Cliff Notes version of the book. We're waiting for my copy in the mail somewhere.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
do these mirror the stages of grief that some of us may understand? No, they're different.
Yes. So basically, Kubler-Ross came out with the stages of grief, and those were actually meant for the dying. So, you know, which are beautiful. Those are meant for the people that are dying. When you study, I studied grief in my master's program, and it's meant for people that are dying. And unfortunately, we kind of took that on in pop culture and pop psychology as people that are, living. But this is kind of one of the first frameworks, truly, that it's for the living that are like our body is slowly dying. But it's for the living, and we can say, like, okay, we're grieving something that is slowly changing and decomposing. If we're just going to be real about it, right? And I laugh because I have dark sense of humor and I just you just have to. So it's very different. We have dismissal, shock, apology, fault, fight, hope slash hopelessness, and trust. And those are the seven phases. And you can be in all of them all at once, and or you can, it's nonlinear and it's kind of like this messy, beautiful process.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, during the pandemic, while Clubhouse, which was the social media app, was very popular, we had a conversation around grief. And that was the first time that I heard, at least on the grief stages. And I appreciate that clarity too, because I actually, in my own conversations around grief, I talk about how, well, not only in that Clubhouse conversation, it was the first time to acknowledge that the stages and phases are nonlinear. And at the same time, I think for me, I'd always talked about when you're talking about trust, I had gone to when you're talking about the phase of trust that you come in and out of, I was talking about, I paralleled it to the stage of meaning and acceptance or acceptance and meaning that we understand through the death grieving lens. So I'm really excited to kind of dig into that. Um, you do spend some parts of the book kind of talking about your wedding day and shifts around that and watching your body changes. So I was wondering if you could talk. And actually, that is a conversation we do have within Diversability a lot is kind of navigating dating, finding partners. How do you talk about your disabilities? And yeah, if you want to talk about that and partnership and how you navigated that.
Gosh, yeah. That's still a huge deal. I mean, I have an interabled relationship because I've been with my partner Sean for almost 11 or 12 years. And, for the first 6 years of our relationship, I was non-disabled, and quote unquote, healthy, whatever you want to define that as. Um, and so yeah, I was that typical 10-year-old planning her wedding, right? Like that's who I was. Um, and then when it came, we had a COVID wedding. And so there was that, and we like uninvited half of our guests, and there was all of that stress. But I had also just received some serious surgeries that really saved my life, but also disabled me more. Um, so some of my surgeries, I had fusion surgeries, but then it turned out I am a very rare case where I actually had failed fusions because my body has rejected the hardware. And so that has been a major body grievance for me. And I have to be on like a bunch of immune suppressants for the rest of my life, and they had to take out as much as they could. But that's been tough. And so because of that, like my muscles are deteriorating and all of that. And so, but with COVID, a lot of the people in my life hadn't seen me disabled, like visibly disabled. And it was almost like my wedding was like a coming out. And I, was using I talk about this in the book. I was using my grandma's, the same type of rollator my grandma was using. Like she called it the Cadillac of rollators. Like, everyone knows what that is, like the red rollator they give you with like the big seat. Um, and that was fine, but also like my inner ableism and ageism was like, I don't want this on my wedding day. And I was still fighting that. There was a lot in me. The one phase I go into the most is fight. Like that is where I go. And that's when, if you dive into the book a little bit, you're very aware of what's happening, but like you're just kind of like, F it, like you just move forward and you overwork and you push your body too far. And it's just like very non-intuitive. And it can be very harmful. And that comes from my inner capitalism and just a lot of things. And I'm working on it. I've done a lot of healing, but when I was, my mom and my aunt surprised me with a really sleek rollator from Byacre that was like beautiful and, matched my wedding dress. And it was just like it was just beautiful. And I felt really like a beautiful bride, but also like there was this piece of me that was majorly grieving this wedding, this day that I had always dreamed of. Like I was not able to enjoy it. I was in so much pain the whole time. I wasn't able to even go upstairs. Like it wasn't an accessible venue. Um, I like there's just so much we laugh about, but I was like, I didn't even see the upstairs. Um, and so there's a lot of it where I was like literally like hanging on my husband to dance. And then like I was sitting in my rollator and there was just so many things where I'm like, now I'm looking at it and I'm like, as like a person who's lived in a disabled body for years now, and has really done the body grief work. There's so much stuff I would have done differently, but then I was like just this like green disabled girly who was like fighting so hard to not be disabled, and that was so sad. Like that was so sad. And again, like it makes me sad and a little angry because there was ableism there. There was um but there was also just unhealed grief. What that is unhealed body grief. That is what it is. And like she needed just love and compassion and time, but she just didn't have it.
Mm.
Um, yeah.
So you're talking about you've done a lot of this body grief work, and now we're aware of what these phases are, and we'll learn about them in the book. And sometimes just the first step is the awareness, but I'm curious if you could share a little bit more of what that body grief work looks like.
Yeah. A huge part is truly allowing yourself um, to really feel the feelings in your body. I think sometimes there's like actually, I know sometimes there's this concept, especially when it comes to people, um, whether it's you're disabled or you're aging or you're going through menopause or you have an injury where it's just you're hurt and you disconnect from your body. And the biggest part about the body grief process is it's connecting the mind, body, spirit again. And that is really painful emotionally. And so a big part of these 7 phases is reconnecting that again. And a huge, huge antidote to body grief is community. Which is, I think right now is like more than ever is what we need.
I love that. I feel like I spend a lot of my book is about community too.
Yeah,
Um,
it
and
is.
we grieve and we heal in community. Um, okay, I want to talk about, so you said this was a 3-year process. This is my brain jumping back to the beginning.
Yeah, no, I love
Can,
it.
can you talk a little bit about, and then I want to go, and then I want to close with like the actionable stuff. But this book, you said it was kind of like 3 years in the making. I want to I want to dig into kind of what that process was like for you. Why did you feel like this book needed to be out in the world and yeah, the conversations with different publishers, things like that. Yeah, if you just want to share a little bit more of your publishing journey.
Yeah, that was wild because again, like I have this experience in the mental health field and I really have this experience in like the eating disorder and body image field. And I was very much newly in this disabled chronic illness space. And I write, and I'm a good writer, but that is not what I went to school for. And so Ruby Warrington, who is an amazing author, she wrote Sober Curious and Women Without Kids. I was on her podcast, and then I found out that she does book coaching and book is a book doula. And I spoke with her, and she was like, "Let me help you." And so she helped me come up with like an amazing pitch, and then Folio Lit Agency signed me on, and there was a ton of interest in the book. I think just because it's so universal, that like everybody in a body is grieving, especially after the pandemic. I think there's a long COVID story in this book. I think with just how individualistic this society has become and the need for community and the need for feeling our grief. Like, as you said, you guys have talked about I say you guys, I'm sorry, it's the Chicago in me. Y'all have talked about um, you know, grief 4 times on the podcast. Grief is this thing that is being talked about so much because I think we're all experiencing it. And so, so many publishing houses were really interested in it. And yeah, we went, I was actually, it was the week of my total hysterectomy that I had like a bunch of meetings with publishing houses, and then we went through like the bidding process, and it was really, really life-changing. And since then I've been writing the book, and now it's going to be out and into the world, and I'm really excited.
What are you hoping the impact that it will have?
Honestly, it's just hitting me that people are actually going to read it. The impact I hope will be that I talk a lot about, you know, even if it triggers something in you, because I talk a lot about the isms and privilege and how that is, you have to acknowledge that in order to heal your body grief. So if you feel activated by that part, that means that it's just more more evidence that you need to heal, right? So I hope that people understand that if you get uncomfortable, it just means that there's more healing to be done. And if anything, I hope people just relate to the stories in the book because there's so many amazing, beautiful stories in the book. Like I can't even tell you, like some of these stories will just grip your heart. I mean, there's joy, there's tear jerkers, and you might not be like, I see myself in every way, but you'll be able to say, oh my goodness, I see my granddaughter, or I see my friend, I see my neighbor, and really understand what this person's going through.
Mm, yeah. We talked a little bit about the importance of community through through all of these different phases and all the time. I guess I'm curious, and I think that's one question that we get a lot from people too is how do you go about finding your community?
Yes. Well, I'm not gonna lie, it's been hard since I've become disabled. Here I'm from Chicago. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. I live in an area that has no sidewalks. Um, Charleston, South Carolina, even though I'm on the Mayor's Commission ADA board, it's very inaccessible here. So I don't drive because of my chronic illness and disability. It's tough. So I'm not trying to make this seem like just find community. It's easy. Um, Social media is a huge, huge deal for people with disabilities and, who live in places like I do, where it's like that is a big deal. So I don't want to ever, ever say that like virtual relationships aren't real. Like those are very, very real relationships. Like I said, me and Cassidy have like we FaceTime every day. Like that is a huge deal for me. Um, Another thing is libraries are another really big one. So I think those like again like free resources, free communities, book clubs. I know for me like I've taken up painting recently and like finding people that have similar play, like things like that. One thing that has been a big thing that for me in healing, and I talk about this in the book as well, is finding play that doesn't have purpose and getting community through that. We can find community through advocacy and things that have purpose, which I think is so great. Like, let's do more of that, especially now. And I think it's really wonderful to have community through things that don't have quote unquote purpose because I think that really like what is the word? Rejuvenates our soul so that we can go out and advocate more. Um, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes me think about, I mean, I'm not a part of this community, but actually I guess I'll share one community I'm in is called NYC in LA.
Oh,
And um
it's
and
fun.
what'd you say?
That's fun.
Yeah, and actually the reason why I brought up that community is they were hosting an event and I found out that a bunch of people there had met through the dancing community. And they're not and these are I I would they're not hobbyists. They're like good enough that they're not competing. I don't know where to put them,
Yeah.
but somewhere in between they love dancing so much that they're
Oh,
out there and they know how to do it. Um but yeah, I love that idea of because in many ways sometimes and and potentially driven by capitalism, we we place worth on our work, right? And I will acknowledge, and if the work is the advocacy, right?
yeah.
It's what's the next thing you have a hot take on? And I remember, I think for me, especially last year, it was how can I relieve myself of the burden that I need to have a hot take on everything all the time?
That's good.
Um, But okay, so to drill in a little more, so you said social media and virtual relationships are relationships. And one thing I had to check myself on is I used to say, oh, like me and this person are meeting IRL, which stands for in real life, but meeting someone on a Zoom is also IRL. And so what I really mean is I'm meeting someone in person. Uh,
Yes.
and both a Zoom meeting and an in-person meeting are IRL. But yeah, so say you're on social media, because I like to like really dig in. How do you go about building those online friendships?
Honestly, commenting on someone's post, sliding into someone's DMs, I am not against any of that. Um, I think that that's what I did with you, where I was just like, I'm a new author, I'm not against being cringy at all. I'm a typical millennial who was like posing, with my braces and And, like we went through those cringy years. So it's like, I'll be cringy. And it's
And
like,
they're
I
also,
really,
yeah,
yeah,
and it's also not cringy too.
fair.
Um, because then we met, right? So,
Yeah.
um,
And I think, this is very much a community that is sacred to so many, the disabled space. And um I have had so much to learn, and I have still have so much to learn. And I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've I'm also like just so in awe of this space. And I am just, I'm excited to meet new people every day. Like truly authentically excited. And yeah, I think like when people introduce themselves to me, or I introduce myself to others, and we're like, oh, like let's hop on a Zoom, or like let's have a coffee, or let's like, I'll paint sometimes. Or like if they, enjoy cannabis and they're like, oh, like let's, smoke it or have a glass of wine together. It's like that's really fun.
yeah.
I experience chronic pain on a really acute level, and so sometimes it can just be nice to sit and chat. Another thing too is like getting out of the house, if you can do that, and sitting again, I'm trying to think of things without money because I just don't want to like pigeonhole there. And that's what I really tried to do in the book too. But going to parks and bringing music. Um, I, you know, I talk about so much in the book, and now I'm not gonna lie, my it's kind of leaving me.
That's
But
okay. It's a lot. But
yeah.
I wanted to close. So part of I love all those examples that you shared. And after we hosted our first event on grief, one thing that came out of it, we hosted a diversibility event talking about grief and kind of how it shows up in the disability community. One of the takeaways from it was that we wanted to launch a monthly series called Off the Record Real Talk, which is to kind of
Oh,
share some of those softer, more tender moments. And we've been hosting those. But I guess I am curious because whenever we think about grief, it's often paired with trauma and it's often paired with sadness. And
mm.
so I'm wondering where joy fits into this conversation around body grief.
Yes, yes. Of course, despair it occurs with grief, of course, right? It's like we think of grief, we think of sadness. I think grief literacy is lacking in our Western world like no other. Um, if we look at other cultures, it's almost like we get uncomfortable when we look at how they practice grief. I was an anthropology major and as a bachelor's, which is people laugh about that. They're like, that's so random. But I loved studying other cultures and just I thought that was so interesting. And the way in which people celebrate and mourn are usually incredibly synonymous.
Mm,
And here, no, not the same. And but when we are in our bodies and we truly connect the mind, body, spirit, that actually when you really start to connect that, they do feel the same, grief and gratitude. It's like this elation feeling where you're mourning something, but you're also celebrating something at the same time. You're mourning what you've lost and you're celebrating what you have. Think about when you've lost a loved one and you're looking at photos of that loved one, and you're sitting around family and you're really, really feeling the feelings. You're letting your mind, body, spirit connection truly be there. You're watching the emotions pass like the weather, and you're sitting there in your body, and you're not numbing it with anything. And you're being with your family or your friends and community. You're looking at pictures and you're crying, but you're also laughing about the memories. That right there is grief and gratitude in the same moment.
mm,
I think that's when grief and joy are together. Um, and I talk about that a lot. And I think when we think of grief, we're scared. But if we can slowly like allow ourselves and allow these emotions to seep in and maybe even weave the mind, body, spirit back together. And this is not to go along with religion or to go against people's faith. It's really just connecting ourselves back together. It can be really healing.
Hmm. And when you say mind, body, spirit, like, can you dig into a little bit what
Yes.
that means and looks like?
Yeah, so our truly our mind, meaning our thoughts, our spirit, meaning, like our kind of like our values and our consciousness, and our body, meaning like our actual physical body, our organs, our flesh, our blood. And our spirit, meaning like our beliefs, our, you know, our connections, who we are, our values.
What would you say to someone who is in the fight phase of their body grief?
Oof. Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. When they're in the fight phase of body grief, their amygdala, which is fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, is being hijacked by all the stress hormones in the body. So take a deep breath and take another one and another one. But also, it's okay to be fighting right now because all you want is for this not to be real. That's all you want, is it for not to be real. And I would validate that this is okay, that this is normal, and find compassion for wherever they are. And I would ask them what they're running from, hypothetically, what they're running from, and what they're searching for instead. In that chapter, I have so many amazing stories of people, really sad, heartbreaking stories, but also, triumphant stories of people fighting for something that they don't, they're trying to look away from what really is happening with their bodies. And when it comes down to it, it's, you know, fear of contagion sometimes when it comes to age. We look at people aging and we look away, right? Because it's like, oh, I don't want that. I don't want that. Or we look at people who are sickly. And, if I go out and I don't have makeup on and I'm having a really bad day, sometimes people just like look away. And it's like they don't want that because they think it's contagious. Um, and so there's this fight piece. And it's so I think compassion, grounding yourself, I think that would be the first thing I would say to them.
I feel like I just sat through a meditation. Um,
Oh, good.
so when you shared a little bit about your origin story, this is my last question before we tell everyone where they can get your book.
Okay, great.
You said that you used to say, focus on what your body can do, not what it looks like. And you acknowledge that there might be some ableist undertones underneath that. What would you say instead today?
It doesn't matter if your body can do or not do. Focus on the connections you can make. And yeah, let's focus on memories and connections. I don't care if your body can do anything or what it looks like.
If we can, oh, and what does disability pride look like to you these days?
Hmm. Gosh. Honestly, it sounds so repetitive, but leaning into community, really continuing to do that and meet people and friends and meet people that get it, like really meet people that get it. Challenging my ableism every day and finding just joy in being myself. Like I was laughing very hard yesterday, but also really prideful and also like, what the heck? Like in my bathroom, the bathroom that I use to myself, there's a mirror. We've lived in this house for almost 4 years, and I sit in my wheelchair and do my hair, and the mirror is up for a standing person. And I've never been able to see the bottom of my hair. And I was sitting there and I was like, what? Like, why is the mirror up there? And so I just moved the mirror down and I was like, well, that just made a hell of a difference. And I was like, what? I just moved the mirror. But like how the fact that that never registered, that I could just move the mirror. And somewhere deep in my soul, I wonder if I was like thinking, maybe one day, maybe one day I could, won't need the chair. Or if I was just thinking this, if it was just object permanence, I don't know. But, I was proud of myself for just doing that. Um, because deep down, I don't know what that was about.
Yeah. Or maybe you never even I think a lot about like expansion and possibility.
Yeah,
And if we've always seen a mirror there,
right.
it does take some pattern interruption to say, oh, I can just move it.
Yeah, it's wild.
If people want to get your book,
Yes.
where can they do that?
All places books are sold. So you can get This is Body Grief, Making Peace with the Loss That Comes with Living in a Body. Anywhere and all places books are sold. You can find me on Instagram at Jayne Mattingly, TikTok if it's still there at Jayne I Mattingly, Substack, um, Jayne Mattingly, or This is Body Grief with Jayne Mattingly, JayneMattingly.com. It's
She
just
she
Jayne
she can
Mattingly.
go on. And is it coming out in other formats too?
Audiobook, yes. And it's available UK, New Zealand, Australia, um, Canada. Yeah.
All right. So wherever your favorite book retailer is, in whatever your favorite format is, make sure to go check it out. And one thing I also like to add with books too is, Jayne mentioned find joy in things that don't cost any money. You can also request the book in different formats at your local library. It's totally free to do. And I'm actually in the process of listening to my own audiobook now that I checked out from my local library. So
Cool.
that's always fun. Um, but I appreciate you coming on. This is our first time, I think, talking in
Yeah.
IRL.
Yeah. Yes.
I was like in real life, and podcasts are always such a fun way to get to deep dive with people. And if there are other guests that you think we should have on, whose stories you want to hear, let us know in the comments or shoot us a DM. And thank you so much, Jayne, for coming onto the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.